One of my favorite things in the world to do is watch Friends. I know it's been off for years and years. It's not even around, but I still find myself binge watching old episodes. And I was thinking about this today and thinking, it's the predictability of the friends in the circle, right? You have Chandler with his quirkiness, Monica with her type A of just everything has to be so neat and tidy and organized. It's Phoebe's ability to make you laugh at her silly songs. Ross always comes in with those smart comments, and Joey and him and his food, like it is just so hilarious. And of course, Rachel, she just brings everybody together, and it's just such this beautiful, cohesive team of people. And it's why I wanted to come on and share with you today that I have an opportunity for you to find your friends in the content creation space. So if you are thinking about creating your first or your next digital course, I don't want you to miss this opportunity because Amy Porterfield just opened the doors for registration for her Course Confident Bootcamp. And I'm actually offering a special bonus for anyone that registers for the Course Confident Bootcamp through my special link. So I want you to go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register. That's krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And what you're going to find when you get there is I have this special bonus private podcast series. It's called Money Mindset for Creators. So I want you to go register for Amy's bootcamp, download the podcast, and immediately start listening to it, because what this training is set up to do is to help you get your mind right about monetizing your content, making money so that you can fuel your content creation dreams. So go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp to register for Course Confident. And I cannot wait for you to find your friends and find the people that will be there for you. Do you see what I did there? Yeah, nice little friends segue connection. Go to krystalprofit.com/Amy-bootcamp. And I cannot wait to see you inside. Okay, let's get into today's episode. So I gotta ask you a question that's been bothering me. Are you part of the Profit Podcasting online community? Because in case you didn't know this, we have an incredible Facebook group that is dedicated to all things podcasting, from giving you daily tips and tricks and strategies to help your podcast become better, or from just collaborating and getting feedback on your own podcast. The group is amazing. So make sure you go to krystalprofit.com/podcast community to join us today. So I just wanted to start today's episode with, I am so grateful that I'm surrounded by people that want to know so much about podcasts, and they ask me incredible questions all the time, because honestly, that's the inspiration behind so many of these podcast episodes. And if you're listening to this and you're just getting started, just be patient. Be patient, because if creating content is really hard for you right now, I promise the more you keep putting information out there that's adding value to your audience and your community, then people will start asking you amazing questions, and you'll think, oh my gosh, I have to record a podcast episode about that. And that is actually where today's inspiration for this episode comes from. So I had a question recently about closing a podcast, the outro. How does this work? Like, I feel like I'm doing it wrong, and I feel really dorky, really goofy whenever I finish my podcast episodes. So how do I finish it? That's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get right to it. Welcome to the Profit Podcast, where we teach entrepreneurs how to start, launch, and market their podcast. I'm your host, Krystal Profit, and I'm so excited that you're here. Thanks for hanging out with me today, because if you've been trying to figure out the world of podcasting, think of this show as the time-saving shortcut you've been looking for. So let's get right to it, shall we? So like I said in the beginning, I'm grateful that all of my podcast ideas, I don't just have to kind of pull them out of thin air. I have friends and colleagues, members of this community, members of other communities that are constantly asking questions. And I pay attention to the ones that are very unique because there are some that I've realized I had in the beginning, but I never really asked anyone. I just kind of did something and figured it out and tried it on my own, but then I never really talked about it. So this question for today, how do I end my podcast episodes, my outro, what do I say at the end, comes from my friend Melanie. So shout out Melanie from the DIY Marketing Podcast because she got started on her journey. And then one day she sent me a message and she was like, I don't know that I love the way that I'm ending my episodes. I feel like I need to say something and I need to do it like in this grand, spectacular way. But then I don't just like want to stop because then I feel like I'm like, it's like you're hanging up the phone on somebody, right? So I wanted to share with you a few different ways that you can close your podcast episodes. And I know that I've talked about this before whenever I've talked about formatting your podcast episodes, and I'll link to that. So I have one particular episode that is all about how to format your podcast, the beginning, the middle, the end. And I know that I talked about outros in that episode, but I really just want to go deep into how to end your podcast. So you have a few options. The first one is you can recap everything that you talked about in your show. So if you had a solo episode or you had an interview, what is the big takeaway, right? This could be 2 to 3 bullet points. This could be a number one takeaway that you want your audience to really hone in on as like they move on with their day, right? Because they could be listening to your podcast and then moving on to another podcast, or maybe they're getting out of the car or they're done with their workout or they're done folding the laundry, whatever it was that they were doing while they listen to your show. You want to make sure that they have something tangible to take away from your podcast. So that is number one. You could just do a recap of this is what we talked about today. I hope that you enjoyed this. But again, that's not really like a solid, like, well, what do you say at the end? So that's number one is you can do a recap. The second thing is you can add in your tagline. Now, this is something that if you're brand new to podcasting, you do feel kind of dorky at the beginning. I got to be honest with you because that's what we're all about here, right? I still feel like such a loser sometimes whenever I'm like, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. And I think it's because I've said it so many times over and over and over and over and over again. I have said this between this podcast and I say it at the end of all my YouTube videos. I have said, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere, probably 1 million times now, like easily 1 million times in my life. I have said, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. See, look, I've already said it, 3 or 4 times already in this episode. But the reason why I do it is because it helps me mentally check out of the episode. It doesn't feel like there's a cliffhanger or like, oh, I should have said something else at the end. So even as dorky as I may feel whenever I say that, and I definitely still feel silly sometimes, it helps me know I finished that and no one is going to question whether I kind of just cut off my podcast mid-thought or mid-sentence, or I just feel like there's something final, like it's a conclusion, like it's the end, right? I think about a movie screen and you're seeing the end. That is my tagline at the end of my show. So if you feel kind of weird about how you end things, you could just say your tagline, throw in some music and have it just drift off into the sunset, right? That's the outro. It is drifting your listener off to whatever it is that they're going to do for the rest of their day. So I want you to consider those 2 things first of all. So let's do a recap. You can do your tagline. The other thing is something along the lines of until next time, or I'll see you in the next episode, or I can't wait to do this again. Like just listen to other podcasts. Like that's the best advice I can have is listen to what other people are doing. And I call this podcast modeling. And I've mentioned it a few times on here, but we really, really go into this in Profit Podcasting. We dive deep into how you can use podcast modeling to take ideas and inspiration from other people. We're never copying someone else. And I will actually give you a great example of this. So I've listened to Amy Porterfield's Online Marketing Made Easy podcast for a few years now. Like, it has been a while. It's been a hot minute. And I honestly can't even remember the first time I ever listened to her show because I've been listening to it for so long. But this is another thing. So I have Amy Porterfield in my ear for podcast. I've done B-School with her. I've done DCA with her. I have been obsessed with Amy Porterfield for a while. But when you start listening to somebody else and then you realize you sign off of a Facebook Live just like she does, or you finish a podcast episode just like she does, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh, she's going to sue me for copyright infringement. Right? Like she is going to come after me for saying something just like the way she did. And I kind of got freaked out about it the first time it happened. I'm trying to think of what it was in particular, because I know I even called myself out on it. It was on an episode of this podcast. I was like, oh my gosh, I totally just sounded like Amy Porterfield and I didn't mean it. But it's what happens when you start listening to podcasts. So I do want you to listen to podcasts and see, what do other people say when they're done, when they're at the end of their show and they're trying to wrap things up? But don't copy somebody. Be you. Be you. If you want to say, bye, y'all, see you next week with a little twang to it, do that. It's your show, right? But don't just leave people hanging, right? I love the analogy of, you don't want it to be like, oh, you're having a party and then all of a sudden you turn off the lights and people are like, it's over? What actually happened? Like, what are they kicking us out? Because that's what it feels like if you just like cut off at the end. If you're still struggling with how to end it, here is going to be like, take notes, get a notepad right now, get your Google Doc out and type this up, write this down. But I want you to just say, well, that's it for today. So make sure you go check out the show notes at krystalprofit.com/episode 156. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Fade into the music and we're out, right? I've been thinking about like a movie set and we're out. Cut. But just do something simple. Just say, that does it for today. That's a transition phrase that will take you from you're in the meat of the episode and now we're done. Now we're out of it. Now we can move on with our day because the music is playing. And now I'm totally all over the place thinking of different ways that people do this out in public. I'm thinking of, the Oscars, when they start playing the music, right? When they're like, all right, you got to wrap it up. We're done here. We're playing the music because you need to get the heck off stage. Like, we're done. We got a schedule to stick to. I want you to do the same thing. I want you to wrap it up. Do it whatever way feels natural to you. And if you have to try a few different ways to do it, then do it. You don't have to sign off every single episode the same way. I do. And the reason why I do is because it's familiar. It's what I'm used to. So even if it annoys me, and who knows, it may annoy some people that listen to the show. Maybe they cut off right before the end. They're like, oh my gosh, I cannot hear her say that one more time because I'm going to lose my mind. That's okay. That's okay. But if it's what works for you, then keep doing it. If it's what works for your audience, then keep doing it. But just pick something, right? It's just like everything else. Just pick something and stick with it for a while. If you want to change it up later, that's fine. It was funny. If you listen to the Potty Report on that podcast, the very first episode, this was completely unintentional, but now I think back to, if you listen to it, it probably sounds like it was planned. It was not planned. The very first episode, I said, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. And then I turned off the microphone and I was like, what did I just do? I just cheated on my podcast. I just cheated on the Profit Podcast by using my tagline on this other podcast. No. We can't go doing that. So on the spot, I thought, crap, I've got to think of what I'm going to say every time I sign off of this show, because it's got to be different. It's not the exact same show. It has a different logo. It has a different name, like all the things. It's totally different. So that's where I came up with, oh my gosh, and I was totally spaced out. But that's it for today. So remember, keep it fresh, keep it fun, and just keep going. That's what I say on that podcast. There's no music. There's no editing. There's nothing on that podcast. It is very cut and dry. Hit start, hit stop, upload, and we're done. I keep that very streamlined on purpose to make my life easier, but there's nothing special about it. Keep it fresh, keep it fun, and just keep going. And the reason why I said that, like why that is the tagline of that show, is because that's what I want people to do. Keep it fresh. Like the whole reason why I'm doing that podcast was to do something fun, do something different, do something I'd never done before, which was have a daily podcast where the episodes are 5 minutes and under. That's crazy, right? Like who would have thought that that's what I would be doing? But I thought I want to do something fun. I want to do something different. And that's where it came from. So when it comes to the tagline, I do have an episode that can help you. So check out the show notes and it will help you with the tagline of your show. Go check out the episode that has to do with formatting, because there are some other ideas that can help you if you're really struggling with how to end your show and you need a little bit of inspiration. Go back to the podcast modeling. Go listen to some other podcasts, get some inspiration, go watch those people, your mentors that you like to watch online. How do they sign off from their Facebook lives, right? I doubt that they just say, that's it, and they turn off the camera, right? They probably say something. So pay attention to those, get some inspiration from some other people, and just try a few things out. You can always change it up later. That is like the underlying rule to everything in podcasting. You can always try something out, see if it works, and change it up later. You're not married to any part of the podcast process other than you got to have an audio file and you got to upload it somewhere. Other than that, there are so many ways that you can customize a show and personalize it to be exactly a reflection of who you are and what you're all about. But that's all I have for you today, guys. This episode is short and sweet, and the intention behind that is I'm actually out of town. I'm traveling. We went to go visit my family, and I knew I wanted to record this episode as short and sweet. That way I was still consistent every single week, but I delivered something of value to my audience because this is my podcast, and that is what I want you to take away from this. You have your podcast. Do what you want with your podcast, whether it's your intro, your outro, your music, your schedule, interviews, no interviews, bonus episodes, taglines, no tagline, no editing, whatever. The takeaway from this podcast should be you can do it the way that you want to do it and the way that it works for you. But that's all I have for you today. So make sure you go check out the show notes and go listen to those other episodes. You'll find them at krystalprofit.com/episode 156. And remember, keep it up. We all have to start somewhere. Hey, Profit Podcast listeners. Thanks for sticking around to a little bit after the episode to hear this special message, because I want to hear from you. We are starting a new segment called Fan Mail Shoutouts, and I want to hear from you, and I want to hear your questions. What do you want to know? What questions have you been dying to ask me? So here's how to make this happen. Go to the app where you're listening to this podcast right now. Go there. I'll wait a second. Okay. Now, once you're there, you're going to see a hyperlink at the top of the episode description that says, send Krystal a text message. And that's all I want you to do. Send me a text. It could be casual, informal. It could be totally anonymous, or If you want, you can include your name and the name of your podcast or content wherever you are creating, and I will give you a special shout out in an upcoming episode. So again, go to the show notes for where you're listening to this episode right now, and it will say, send Krystal a text message, and I cannot wait to hear from you and give you a shout out in an upcoming segment of fan mail shout outs.